I'm Joe Carlos, the Senior Director of Content Marketing Strategy at Morehouse College, and I'm a proud member of the Morehouse College class of 2004. And I work in the Office of Strategic Communications, Marketing, and Admissions. And as we celebrate Pride Month at Morehouse, we are having a conversation with a number of different alums, talking about their life and their career, and speaking to them about just different things that have happened along their journey of life since Morehouse, and as well as their outlook on the future. Today, I'm very, very fortunate to be speaking with the George B. Walker Jr.
Yes.
George B. Walker Jr. from the class of 1991, who's based in Washington, D.C. George is the Chief Equity Officer of Planned Parenthood. Welcome, George.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm humbled and honored to be a part of this conversation for my beloved Morehouse.
And we're humbled and honored that you took the time to speak with us today, especially your patience and understanding today as well.
All good.
Thank you. So my first question is, how did you get involved in the current industry or current career that you're in right now? How did you get involved in that?
So I think leading diversity, equity, and inclusion is what I currently do and have done now professionally for the last 10 years. I would say, though, my involvement really started well before taking a job officially in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was always a sense of call to me as someone who left Morehouse and went to divinity school and finished divinity school. I went to Duke, and I had a great 3 years there with just some incredible luminaries, professors like Sam Proctor, who still it amazes me just the gift it was to have him as a leader.
Can't believe it.
And as important, Sam Proctor also had been an early leader of the Peace Corps. So when I left Morehouse, I also served in Peace Corps, and I served in Ecuador. And so that was also another opportunity for me to begin to look at service in a different way. But even as early as, I guess, in a professional way, it certainly started when I was in Peace Corps, when I began to look at what the contributions of different voices meant, what it meant to truly live in a different culture and to understand different folks. Interesting to my story, I was actually born in Panama, but I grew up in Memphis, and I'm a Southern boy through and through. As one of our fellow Morehouse alum, I won't call him out in this interview, but he jokingly teased me once when I was celebrating my ties to Panama, and he said my I'll use a more polite term, but he basically said I was from Memphis. I guess that's really what
I can only imagine.
We can be some colorful folks sometimes in our language.
True.
And so but I honor that part of the journey because I think it really did bring me to thinking much more about what equity looks like. And at the point in which my career really began to incorporate this, I was actually working at an LGBT organization, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender organization. I was the vice president of strategic partnerships and was raising money and also setting up these programs, and really thought, there's a connection to people being able to tell their full story in their work. And diversity and inclusion, it's the great irony for me is people that I think of as spiritual mentors, because in many ways they're now both deceased, but particularly Roosevelt Thomas, who was a member of the church that I attended when I was a student at Morehouse Friendship Baptist Church, was an early pioneer in corporate responsibility and in corporate diversity and inclusion. And he was someone I got to know, and I always was curious, but I didn't know like that's a real job, because at that time it really wasn't a function in the way that people hear about it now. And there was another man, Thurman Woodard, who also was a member of the church and who had been an early leader of diversity and inclusion at Dale. His daughter and I became great friends, and we still are to this day. And he was also a leader in diversity work. Now, at the time, when we talked about diversity work, it really was very much about women and underrepresented minorities, and I throw that in quotes because it's not my word of choice. But that's what we were talking about, and we were talking about Black people essentially. So it was diversity. Wink, wink. You mean
Right.
how do we get more Black people in positions? Obviously, the journey has moved a whole lot, and I think that we have a very different approach today in terms of looking at the breadth of what diversity means and how it shows up. And what I say to people all the time, that anybody, irrespective of race, background, social orientation, gender, identity, go down the list. If you're a human, you're diverse. You come to this world with things that are unique to you.
Right.
What the focus of this work is today is really very much around how we look at diversity to really be to sort of make it all. I won't say colorblind, because that's absolutely not true, and it's absolutely the opposite. But that the value of employees who are Black or brown, or identify as BIPOC in some way, Black, Indigenous, people of color, Latinx, um, down the list, all bring value to their work. And I think that what we are doing now, particularly in my work, I know one of the things I'm really focusing on are three things. It's about building trust, it's about listening, and it's about creating belonging. And if you can do those three things in an organization, and they'll come through policies, they'll come through cultural shifts and changes. It also comes, frankly, through representation, and not just hiring people, but keeping people and promoting people. And all of those systems are, all come together to make this work. So that's a long answer for how I got into it or how I've been doing it. But I think it really is, to me, it is very much along the lines of my own growth as a human, and how I began to understand myself and think about what my contributions were and are, and began to parlay that into understanding how does that work within an organizational system. So that's kind of what brings me to my work today.
Thank you. It's interesting. CSR is to your point. It kind of came out of it. It wasn't something that was discussed necessarily. I guess there were small elements of it and or examples of it, but it definitely wasn't as nearly as full scale as it is obviously today. And we've seen in the last 12 to 15 months, or a definite shift, probably in that industry, a definite shift as it pertains to how one is really talking about their CSR, or more importantly, how diverse their human capital is within their organizations. So yeah, so very, very, very interesting. So what's been your greatest professional accomplishment?
So I saw the question earlier, and it's always an interesting question to me, because I think that, there's a whole probably long list of things. I mean, this year in May, had the COVID angels worked a different way, I would have been celebrating my 30 years away from Morehouse. So a lot has certainly been under my belt at this point. But one of the things that I think about the most in terms of a real jump or pivot in my career was actually an appointment. I was on President Obama's White House Board of Advisors for HBCUs. And I think for me, in many ways, there were things that we could certainly look back on and go, okay, well, we didn't do much, or maybe we would have loved to have gotten a lot more accomplished. But there was such an insight for me in terms of being able to see other HBCUs, understand Morehouse's place within the realm of historically Black colleges. Understanding for me in a way that, my mom went to Tennessee State. I'd had relatives who'd gone to HBCUs, and relatives who didn't, and didn't go to college, and also didn't went to PWIs. But I grew up in a church that was heavily represented by HBCUs, and it was a strong driver of my formation. in terms of that experience as a kid. And coupled with my parents' understanding of like what was important and what kind of values. And so having that honor to be able to sit on that board and to have these discussions, but then to also really understand that if it weren't for HBCUs, some cities, particularly in the South, wouldn't have a Black middle class. And by middle class, I'm not talking about just an affluent middle class, and I'm not, giving a nod just to an elite class, because I think that, frankly, that exists in a lot of places as well. But truly, the working bread and butter of communities would not have happened because legally it wasn't possible. And that's why HBCUs existed. And so having the breadth of being able to see some of our HBCU two-year schools, or to have a better understanding of some of the histories of, I think it's now 106 HBCUs, it was such a gift to me personally. And it really set a different trajectory for how I was able to think about my career. When I got that appointment, I actually wasn't working in diversity, equity, and inclusion space, at least not fully as my job. Um, but it was such a big pivot. And it also gave me an opportunity to learn and to see from some really phenomenal and bright people. I made connections that like still last and I think about a lot. Some of my fondest mentors came out of having had that experience. And I think, frankly, at a certain point in your career, you often are sought out as a mentor, which basically means you're getting older. But it's nice
That's what
to
it means. That's what it means.
that's exactly what it means. But it's nice to have those touchstones of folks who you still turn to.
Yes.
So
how
that for
long?
me, yeah.
That's huge, obviously, and very it's historic in ways that it defines historic, obviously. But
Right.
how long were you on the advisory committee?
So from 12 to 16.
Oh,
So
wow.
2
Okay.
years
Yes.
with the last Obama term. And so, I think professionally, if you think about it, at least for me, when I think about professionally what happened, it was also an opportunity to push that board a bit to think about diversity.
Sure.
We pulled off a couple of conferences where we partnered with the National Black Justice Coalition, which is an same gender loving, Black identified serving nonprofit that I was really fortunate to be involved with. But it was really nice to have that partnership and those kinds of conversations within an HBCU context. And frankly, there were a lot of HBCU leaders who were really excited to have those conversations. When Obama was in office, I mean, you think about it, we're talking about Pride today. It was the first time that the White House got lit up in a rainbow. All kinds of things that were now we almost think of as blasé hadn't really happened yet. And they were probably even more conservative in not happening within an HBCU structure. So for me, having had that opportunity and growing professionally and being able to parlay that into other conversations within my church, within the work I was doing just professionally. It was really transformative. That experience was really made a difference for me.
Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
so since you mentioned graduation and you mentioned 30 years, but since you graduated, what's been your and God bless, I mean, congratulations. Not everybody made it, after 30, right?
No, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Right, and nothing's promised. But so congratulations on the fact that it's been 30 years. But what's been your what's been your most rewarding lesson, you think, since leaving Morehouse?
So I think it is the lesson that kind of goes into another question I've been thinking about. Well, first, Morehouse was amazing to me. I kind of was one of those kids who drank the Kool-Aid and knew I wanted to go to Morehouse after seeing the Glee Club perform at Metropolitan Baptist Church with Dr. Fred C. Lofton, who was a Morehouse graduate years ago, well before I ended up going to Morehouse. But I had a great experience at Morehouse in many ways. And the truth is, I had a great experience, and it's also true I wasn't out in college. At least I wasn't to myself, and I certainly wasn't to anyone else. I was still figuring it out. The
Hmm.
times were very different, um, and I had a lot of successes in school, socially, and it felt like I had a good Morehouse life, as it were, and I think about what I often, what did I miss by not knowing who I was as an openly gay man, not understanding that? What did I miss? And so I think that for me, I don't know that I can answer that question. I
Hmm.
was speaking with a very dear friend, a close friend who's a Morehouse graduate, and I was telling him about even having this conversation, and he mentioned he was a bit triggered because that wasn't necessarily a happy time for him at
Hmm.
Morehouse.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that the lesson I get and the lesson that still keeps with me is the more you show up as yourself, the more other people will show up to be with you. Um, and I think that that lesson, I mean, I've learned, I talked to my line brothers and I talked to other folks that, knew me then who will say to me, oh, well, we kind of thought you were, some
Hmm.
did. And then there are others who are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you dated women. And, it's kind of funny either way you hear it, I guess, in some ways, because that's so retrospective. But at the same time, I think that my lesson learned is the more I live authentically, the more I show up, the more other people are there to show up with you.
Sure.
And people you don't even know who are going to be your allies actually will come out of the woodwork. Or I've learned of stories of folks who defended me in conversations, you know, probably wrongly because in hindsight, I think now if I jokingly say to, well, not jokingly, but I've had friends who kind of say, well, when someone asks someone, is so and so gay, and particularly if the person is out, and then you kind of go, well, I don't know, you ask them. It's kind of like, well, no, I mean, I want you to say, yes, George is gay and his husband is Rudolph and they're my neighbors and they're my church members, or
Right. Right.
they're connected to me in some way that's important. And I feel like that's critical to how we begin to demystify things that we think are other. And that's one of the ways that, just as a matter of fact, we change culture.
Hmm.
Um, and at the same time, what I would say as a lesson about that for me is the more I have shown up, it has allowed other people to show up with me. And I think that's something I carry. And it also teaches you don't have to carry the water by yourself.
Mm. True. So, and thank you again. So, a lot of what you said kind of dovetails into other obviously into other questions, and one of them being, what advice would you give your younger self? I mean, because, and the reason I'm asking is because you had a full experience. You said you had a full
Mhm.
experience, a good experience at Morehouse. You were able to do any number of things that one would want to do when they come to college,
Yeah.
and by the time they leave college as well. And so, what advice would you give your younger self? And would it be just what you said? Just be
Yeah, I
authentic
think it would be. I mean, I think what the in advice is best when it's truly your experience. I often say to folks that there's a difference in being helpful and being useful.
Mhm.
And that came for me as I'm an executive coach, and that was a lesson I learned. And of all the many lessons, that one really, really, really comes up to me a lot. And I make that distinction because often, we want to tell people what we think will help them.
Right.
So, if the analogy I often use is someone dies, you think what you should do is bring a box of chicken or a cake. From the South, that's what you do, right? You
You
know,
got it.
that's the helpful thing. It is helpful to go and to give someone, who may not want to cook, the dessert or the chicken. The useful thing would be to really listen to what they've said they need,
Mhm.
right? So maybe they'll tell you, I actually am vegan and I don't want your cake. And if it has eggs and made of particular content, and I don't eat chicken,
Right.
right? That's the useful thing. So the useful thing says, where might I be of service? And
Mm,
so what I think I would say to my younger me is to, be a little bit more thoughtful about where you're being useful.
mm,
Because I got my feelings hurt a lot of time trying to be helpful, trying to tell folks, well, this is what you need, or this is what, I can give you, or here's how you follow the path. And I think as I've aged and grown, and the more I've learned that, my path worked for me. And I mean, there are many things about my life that I'm very proud of. I'm very fortunate about. I sat in meditation 2 days ago, and literally the word of meditation was grateful and
mm.
gratitude. And I just sit with that. And it is something I hold very humbly. Um, and I don't take for granted that my life has been really quite nice in many ways, and a life of privilege on a whole lot of levels. Um, and I don't take that for granted because every day I'm made aware that the more you live your life and the more authentic you are and the more you show up, sometimes that will go with you, but there are definitely times when that's not in service to what, another agenda might be. So,
Sure.
when you're having a conversation about racism or sexism or homophobia or heterosexism or even religion, um, there are all kinds of opinions about how that's supposed to work, but that's based on your experience. And it's not until you live that experience that you can say, well, you know what? I've learned that the more I show up, the more I like me, the more okay I'll be with whatever the world gives me.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that's what I think I'd probably be saying to myself. And I
You
try to
know,
do it while preaching.
got you. It's the difference between usefulness and helpfulness. I think that is I mean, that's huge, and it's the difference. One of the differences between mentoring and coaching as well.
Mhm.
You're doing two different things, and the way you broke that down, that's really struck me,
Mhm.
because I people come to me and ask me questions all the time, and I think I've been more helpful. They asked for
Mhm.
advice. What would you do here? I think I've been more helpful than useful,
Mhm.
in many cases. And so I'm going to be far more cognizant of that. And I hope that everybody who's watching this is far more
Mhm.
cognizant, who watches this will be far more cognizant of trying to be, the useful part, being higher up than the
Right.
helpful. Helpful is great. Helpful is great.
Yeah,
No
absolutely.
question. But
Yeah.
useful is true, is that true service there.
Mhm.
Um, so what does we mentioned pride, a few times here. So what does pride mean to you in Pride Month? What does that mean to you?
I have a couple of different reflections on it. It's interesting that this Pride Month will also be celebrating Juneteenth
Yeah.
as a holiday. And my husband and I sold an apartment in New York on June 19th, 2019. And I
Okay.
remember sitting there. We were coming back to Washington for my job, and it was a gray day in New York. I got to the city late after some train delays, and I get to the table, and I just really was trying to like get the business executed. And fortunately, I was the seller, so I didn't have as much paperwork. But
Right.
I remember sitting there and I was signing and I looked up and thought about the young white couple that was sitting across from us or from me because Rudolph wasn't there, my husband wasn't there, and I just kind of smiled to myself and I said out loud, I was like, "It's Juneteenth," and what I didn't say was, "Well, might be a couple of acres and a donkey, so I'm going to take this and keep it moving." Um, but it was, there was a level of pride that we were sitting on the sale table. And
Yeah.
again, my husband wasn't there. I was physically there by myself. It was definitely a moment of pride that we were making a profit and a capital system on a real estate transaction in which we, as two Black gay men, were selling to this white couple at a
Mhm.
profit. And in our case, it was a profit that we would be able to use to do some other things to advance stuff that we wanted to do. Um, I love the pride piece of the fact that it wasn't, I mean, I'd have been proud if it was just mine. I've sold apartments in my own name or sold a house in my own name, but it was very different to have the experience of knowing, and they knew who they were buying from.
Right.
And I just kind of thought, okay, things are definitely have definitely changed. I think of pride when I think of the many times I get asked to have a conversation or talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, in professional settings, and it is not without incident, or matter of fact, I'm actually just looking at the screen and I see that over my shoulder is a picture of me and my husband on our wedding day, and I'm not going to move that picture, no
No.
matter who I'm talking to. It's like,
Mhm.
that's the picture. Now if I keep moving, I suppose you'd also see a picture of my parents who are no longer with us, but and I'm proud that they were such amazing parents. And I am, June is also a funny month for me because some years it kind of strikes me more than others. And this year did hit me that my mom died June 2nd
Mm.
in 2006. And, that was, it was a while ago, but it also feels like yesterday in some ways. My dad lived with me for the last 3 years of his life, and he actually was at my wedding on 10-10-10. And I remember him when we had the conversation about me getting married. And, he said to me, he's like, well, he calls me by my nickname. And he said, I'm still a little old fashioned about this. And I said, I remember it just like yesterday, I kind of laughed and I said, well, Dad, it's okay. You can be old fashioned, but guess what? You live with me, so you're going to be okay. And God bless him. He did, and he was the first person I came out to. I told
Mm.
my dad before I told my mom, and many people are often surprised by that, and they're like, "Oh, wow, how did that happen?" My father was a military guy. He was, on the surface probably a little bit more gruff. Well, not probably, he was a lot more gruff than my mother. My mother was much more elegant and you know put
Sure.
together and all that jazz. And yes, he was. He had a swagger in his own way. But but it was clear to me that my parents loved me,
Mhm.
like, and they had the kind of love for me that allowed me to know that I was fearfully and wonderfully made. I was whole in the sight of God, and that it never was a question about whether God loved me or that my parents loved me.
Mm.
So when I did get to the place where I could have a conversation with them about being gay, and it didn't come easy, and it didn't come like right away. I was a grown up. I moved away at the time. I think it was like 25, 26, something like that. But I remember just being clear. I mean, and I just cried when I told my mother, um, who I swear was prompted by my father, although he says, "Oh no, I didn't tell her anything." I'm like, "Yeah, okay." It was really like the first question she asked me on Christmas Eve when I came into the house. So I'm like, "Okay, you didn't just come up with that." So there was some kind of prompting. Um,
Sometimes.
some type. They were married 50 years, so I'm sure they had their ways of communicating. But I
Right.
remember, I was crying, and my mother said, well, "Why are you crying?" And I was just like, "Well, I was afraid that, how would you love me?" And
Mm.
she just looked at me like, "Don't be silly. That's not even the question. That is not even the question." And I went back in my bedroom and, kind of laid on the bed for a few minutes. And I don't think I was back there 5 minutes. And she came back and said, "Why are you back here?" And I was like, "Well, because, I just was trying to get myself together." And she's
Right.
like, "Get yourself together in the den. Come on back in the house. Nothing's changed. You're my son." And, and I have a letter I keep that she sent me later that year, or maybe after Christmas, I think it was. And her just telling me how proud she was of me. And so for me, I think that space, that love, that the humility that comes with that love really allowed me to incorporate all of who I am into all the work I do. I
Mm.
mean, I'm very fortunate. I get to, make a very decent living doing work that is really meaningful, in a place with values and a mission I care about, at a time and a place where the country has come to really see the value of this work, in a way that's beyond window dressing. I mean, some places are still there, of course, but that's not quite where I think I am. I pray I'm not anyway. And that makes me proud. It makes me proud that, I get to show up fully and presently, every day, and I get to engage all of who I am. I mean, in fact, there was a recent holiday celebration of Pride Month, and I completely missed that it was happening. And and I lead, diversity, equity, inclusion, and I've done it in big organizations at this point, and
Right.
of course, I mean, I know what month it is and all that other jazz, but this particular event, it just kind of went over my head, and I realized it's like, because as a matter of fact, I live my everyday just being able to be me.
Yeah.
And when my friends ask me about how's my family, they're asking about my husband, my mother-in-law, other people in our circle. And it is as a matter of fact. I don't have to, I hardly have to think about it. That's also, I live in a progressive city and a whole lot of other things. But, that does give me a lot of pride. Um, and I'm humbled by it because I know that that's not the circumstances for everybody.
Right.
So.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. So, you kind of answered my next question, which is good, which is good there. Or next couple questions. It was all wrapped up in that one. But what do you feel? And you mentioned something earlier about ally, being an ally. What do you feel the ideal attributes of an ally?
Well, so I've gone back and forth actually with my husband on this because he doesn't agree with me. But one of the things that I heard said that I actually strongly, sort of hold to, is that you probably can't call yourself an ally. I think other people have to call you that, right? And so for me, what that means is, how do I demonstrate in the way that I show up that someone would say, oh, he's an ally to X? And for me, what I look for when I think of allyship is truly, making the space for real belonging. I think about what it means to show up when the person isn't there. I mentioned earlier my line brothers, and we've gotten closer, much later in life than perhaps we were those many years back in the fall of 1989. And some of them, I think about like how they've shown up for me. And it has really, it chokes me up, frankly, because many of those stories I didn't even know about. And it matters to me that there have always been people in my life who showed up for me. And I've always sought to be one of those people who showed up. So you don't need to be in the room, and I know that stuff is going to go right. I don't want to feel like, I am always carrying the water on whatever the issue is. And I've, and particularly if it's a social justice issue around race or gender or sexual orientation, which those are the ones I get asked about from a personal perspective, or the more clear one, right? I mean, I'm also adopted, and adoption today means it's a very different world than the world I was adopted in, where my parents didn't really talk about it very much, and not because of shame or anything, but it was, again, I think for them, a matter of fact. It's like, this is our child, let's keep it moving, and my family was always that way, and it wasn't a thing. But I've had very close friends who have gone through real struggles around infertility or losing a child. And, when they were bringing me in, not so much just as George, but Reverend Walker, to pray with them in decisions around terminating a pregnancy, or a decision around what their family would look like. And where for me, I think being called upon as an ally, is talking about the benefits of adoption. And, and it's my personal story, but I've also seen the story for so many other people. Um, and that is a way for me that I think is important to show up for folks. Again, it goes back to when you are fully yourself, people can be themselves around you and they will allow you to, my mother used to say to me, your truth isn't my truth.
Mm.
You told me it's your truth.
Right.
And that's all I care about. And I have another dear friend who lost her mother several years ago, and I knew her parents, but I'm very close to her. And I remember saying to her, she told me that her mother's expression was, "You don't have to know people's business to pray for them."
You do not.
And I think that's where allyship really is. I don't have to know everything about what your story is to pray for you, to understand that if you've told me it's your truth and there's pain there, I want to sit with it. And that discomfort motivates me to be of service, to be useful in a way that might be important. What conversations am I going to have at a policy table that remind people that, okay, you missed this community, or this community wasn't mentioned, or, can you hear what it means for someone who's transgender? Or someone, I think one of the big effects for me around COVID has been the disparity in terms of mental illness and how it's shown up. And I think the fall is going to be a big, big, big reminder that we are not over this season and the pandemic is not completely behind us. So how are we allies in terms of making sure that people's mental health is really not taken for granted. And that when someone says, look, I need a minute or I need to recoup, we can hear that and not just see it as, buck up or man up, but okay, what do you need? Asking that question of what will be really important to being a really good ally. And that for me feels like, again, I want people to see me and to say George is an ally. And then I also just want to live in a way that people will say I'm an ally. And, I will say, yep, I made a difference. That's what's important to me.
With that, George, gosh, thank you. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
very, very much. That was my last question. And well, again, thank you so much for your time and your candor and your insights. And if there's anything else you'd like to share, please do so. Please do so now, Rev.
No, I guess I want to just say, I didn't know exactly how the conversation would go. I knew I was open to it because I do love Morehouse so much. And I have so many dear friendships from my time at Morehouse, and those friendships have gotten deeper and more, and more strong as time has gone on. I have been involved with weddings on the burial side, as well as the marriage and the blessing side, and just the comfort and the prayer side of so many Morehouse and Spelman friends. And I'm really, really grateful for my time at Morehouse. And I'm also really clear that Morehouse was good for me at the time. It wasn't necessarily as good for a lot of the folks who were my cohort or my contemporary, particularly on issues of LGBTQ life. I'm so grateful that that's not necessarily the story of every Morehouse man today. I'm so grateful that Morehouse is pushing itself to be oh, um, to be a leader even in this space. I think that the time is far past due that we really hold to what pride means for all of Morehouse's community. So I'm grateful to be a part of it. And thank you for reaching out to me. and to the folks who told you to call me.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that as well. Well, thank you for all your responses, and especially you're a very busy person, so I sincerely appreciate you taking the time, but truly providing some great insight. This is one of the best parts about Morehouse is the fact that it is, despite being imperfect, I do believe that it is a wonderful place wherein wisdom can be shared, and wisdom flows in conversations, and I love speaking to alums of different eras to just learn, soaking up as much as possible. And I think in our conversation today, I think that will inspire other conversations. Hopefully that will happen as well, where a great deal of education and learning can occur. So, Reverend George B. Walker Jr., Class of 91, I sincerely appreciate your time today, and on behalf of the Morehouse College Office of Strategic Communications, Marketing, and Admissions, this is Joe Carlos signing off. Thank you.
Thank you very much.